The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy that flows through stars, planets, and the vast emptiness between them. For thousands of generations, the Jedi understood this truth. The Sith twisted it. But all agreed on one fundamental principle: the Force touched everything that existed within their reality. What none of them, not the wisest Jedi Master, not the most cunning Sith Lord, not even Emperor Palpatine himself, could have predicted was what would happen when something arrived that the Force simply could not touch. Something that operated on rules so fundamentally different that their mere presence would begin unraveling the fabric of galactic reality itself. It began on Rannon 4, an unremarkable world in the Outer Rim that served as a minor Imperial supply depot. The planet hosted a small garrison, 3 warehouses of equipment destined for star destroyers in the region, and approximately 200 personnel who considered the assignment a punishment detail. The most exciting event in the past 4 months had been a malfunctioning protocol droid that walked in circles for 6 hours before someone bothered to shut it down. That changed at 1,347 hours local time. The supply officer, Lieutenant Herrick, was conducting his 3rd inventory count of the day when reality tore open above the southern warehouse. There was no hyperspace signature, no sublight engine glow, no ion trail, nothing that any sensor could detect or explain. One moment the sky was clear. The next, a small red structure with a peaked roof simply appeared in mid-air, tumbling end over end as it plummeted toward the Ferrocrete landing pad below. Herrick would later testify, before his unexplained transfer to a mining colony, that the object looked like a primitive dwelling, possibly domesticated animal shelter, origin unknown, structural integrity impossibly maintained despite atmospheric entry at terminal velocity. The doghouse hit the landing pad at approximately 200 km per hour. It bounced. Physics screamed in protest as the small wooden structure rebounded off the Ferrocrete with a cheerful boing sound that no material should have produced, sailed over the warehouse, clipped a parked speeder bike, which immediately exploded for no reason the subsequent investigation could determine, bounced twice more with diminishing enthusiasm, and finally settled upright next to a stack of supply crates. The roof had a small weather vane shaped like a bird. The structure showed no signs of damage whatsoever. For approximately 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then a beagle emerged from the doghouse, shook himself with evident satisfaction, and surveyed his surroundings with the calm confidence of someone who had done this sort of thing before. He was black and white, with long droopy ears and a distinctly self-assured posture. On his head sat a pair of antiquated flight goggles. Around his neck, a red scarf fluttered in the breeze. The beagle turned, barked once, and waited. A boy crawled out of the doghouse after him. He wore a yellow shirt with a black zigzag stripe, shorts, and shoes that had seen better days. His round head, impossibly round, the medical officer would note in his report, featured a face locked in an expression of existential resignation that seemed far too world-weary for his apparent age. "Good grief, Snoopy," the boy said, standing up and brushing red dust off his shirt. "Where are we now?" The beagle, apparently named Snoopy, didn't respond. He was already trotting toward the warehouse, his tail wagging with the enthusiasm of someone on an adventure. The boy, Charlie Brown, though no one in the galaxy knew this yet, sighed with the practiced weariness of someone who had followed this particular dog into trouble many times before. "We need to find a way home," Charlie Brown called after him. "My team has a game tomorrow." "Not that it matters. We'll probably lose anyway. We always lose." Snoopy paused at the warehouse entrance, looked back at his owner, and gave what could only be interpreted as a shrug before disappearing inside. Lieutenant Herrick, watching this scene unfold on the security monitors, made 3 decisions in rapid succession. First, seal the warehouse. Second, alert the garrison commander. Third, pour himself the drink he'd been saving for his retirement party, because he had the distinct feeling his career was about to become very complicated. He was correct, though not remotely in the way he imagined. By the time Herrick reached the warehouse with a security team of 6 stormtroopers, things had already begun to go wrong in ways that defied explanation. The warehouse door, which had been sealed via electronic lock, was now stuck half open. The mechanism had simply stopped working. The security team's comlinks produced nothing but static despite being in perfect working order moments before. One stormtrooper's blaster rifle fell apart in his hands when he tried to ready it, components scattering across the floor in a pattern that the subsequent technical review would describe as mechanically impossible. Inside the warehouse, Charlie Brown was attempting to apologize to a pile of storage crates that had somehow arranged themselves into a precarious tower. "I didn't mean to, I just touched the corner one, I'm sorry," he was saying, backing away slowly as the tower swayed ominously. The tower fell. Not toward Charlie Brown, which would have been merely unfortunate. Not away from him, which would have been fortunate. Instead, it fell sideways, crashed into a support beam, which triggered a chain reaction that caused 17 other stacks to collapse in sequence, each one impacting the next with the precision of carefully planned demolition. Within 15 seconds, half the warehouse's inventory had been reduced to a catastrophic mess of broken crates, scattered equipment, and one very apologetic boy standing in the eye of the chaos. "This always happens to me," Charlie Brown said to no one in particular. Snoopy, meanwhile, had discovered the garrison's small hangar bay. 3 TIE fighters sat in maintenance cradles, their solar panel wings folded for storage. The Beagle approached the nearest fighter, cocked his head thoughtfully, and then, in a movement that none of the security footage could quite capture, was suddenly sitting in the pilot's seat. The TIE fighter's systems activated without anyone touching the controls. "Sir," one of the stormtroopers reported into his comlink, which had mysteriously started working again. "The intruder he's. I don't know what he's doing, sir, but I don't think we should let him continue doing it." On Rannon IV's Garrison Command Center, Commander Pollock stared at the security feed showing a Beagle sitting in a TIE fighter cockpit, his paws somehow reaching the controls despite their design for human hands. The fighter's repulsor lifts engaged. The hangar bay doors, which hadn't been opened, simply weren't there anymore, they had slid aside without any input command. "Scramble intercept," Pollux began, but the communications array chose that moment to catastrophically fail, cutting him off mid-sentence. The TIE fighter, piloted by a Beagle in flight goggles, lifted off smoothly and accelerated out of the hangar with what the flight computer would later log as impossible precision for an untrained operator. In the Force, across thousands of light years, Darth Vader paused mid-conversation with a Star Destroyer captain. Something had just entered the galaxy. Something wrong. Something that felt like a blank space where reality should be. Something that felt, though he did not yet have words for it, like a cosmic joke that no one was supposed to laugh at. "Prepare my shuttle," Vader said, his voice cutting through the captain's tactical report. "I am going to the Outer Rim." If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. Back on Rannon 4, Charlie Brown finally made his way to the hangar bay, only to discover that Snoopy had taken a military spacecraft for a joyride. He sat down on the hangar floor, put his head in his hands, and spoke the words that would become prophetic. "We're never getting home, are we?" The garrison's main reactor chose that moment to experience an unexplained power fluctuation. Nothing dangerous. Not yet. Just the first sign that the laws governing technology in the Star Wars universe were about to meet something they were never designed to handle, cartoon physics, and the unstoppable bad luck of a boy who had never, not once in his entire life, successfully kicked a football. Snoopy banked the TIE fighter through Rannon IV's atmosphere with the casual confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, which, in a certain sense, he had. Every imaginary dogfight atop his doghouse, every fantasy battle against the Red Baron, every triumphant loop and barrel roll existed in the Beagle's mind as genuine flight experience. The fact that he had never actually piloted a spacecraft before was, in his opinion, a minor technicality. The problem was that the galaxy agreed with him. The TIE fighter responded to Snoopy's piloting not as it should have, sluggishly, requiring precise input and years of training, but as if it were an extension of his imagination. When Snoopy pictured himself diving toward the planet's surface in pursuit of an invisible enemy, the fighter dove with aerobatic precision that should have torn the solar panels from their mounting points. When he imagined a victory roll, the craft executed one so perfect that it would have made an Imperial Academy instructor weep with envy. The two TIE fighters that launched in pursuit discovered this quickly. "Target is executing evasive maneuvers," the lead pilot reported, struggling to keep the stolen fighter in his targeting computer. "I can't get a lock. He's moving like he knows what I'm going to do before I do it." This was partially true. Snoopy didn't know what the pursuing pilots would do. He simply knew what the Red Baron would do, and since in his mind these TIE fighters were flown by the Red Baron, he responded accordingly. The fact that his imagined opponent bore no resemblance to the actual tactics of Imperial pilots was irrelevant. Reality was bending to accommodate the Beagle's expectations. In the cockpit, Snoopy's thought bubble, invisible to everyone but somehow tangibly present in the Force, read, "Curse you, Red Baron." He pulled the TIE fighter into a climb that should have stalled the engines. The engines didn't stall. One of the pursuing pilots, attempting to match the maneuver, found his fighter's systems suddenly malfunctioning. Warning lights cascaded across his console in rapid succession: thruster misalignment, power coupling failure, life support fluctuation. He had no way of knowing that he'd flown too close to Snoopy's reality warping field, where Imperial technology met Peanuts physics and lost. "I'm losing control," the pilot transmitted, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Systems are failing across the board. I'm breaking off." His fighter spun out, tumbling toward the planet's surface. The ejection system, thankfully, still worked. The pilot rocketed clear just before his TIE fighter impacted an empty mesa in a spectacular fireball. The second pilot, wisely, decided that pursuing an unknown enemy who could somehow cause system failures by proximity was not worth his monthly pay. He broke off, requesting immediate backup and a full technical analysis of what had just occurred. Snoopy, victorious, performed 3 celebratory loops and then, having thoroughly enjoyed his flight, turned the TIE fighter around and headed back toward the garrison. He'd proven his point. The Red Baron had been vanquished once more. Now it was time to find some dinner. The fact that he'd just made an enemy of the Galactic Empire didn't occur to him. Dogs rarely worry about politics. Back at the garrison, Commander Pollux was discovering that his very bad day was rapidly becoming a career-ending catastrophe. The communications array had been repaired, briefly, before failing again in a completely different way. The warehouse where the mysterious boy had been found was now structurally unsound. 3 support columns had developed stress fractures that engineers insisted were impossible given the building's age and the lack of seismic activity. 2 stormtroopers had accidentally shot each other during what should have been a routine patrol, their blaster bolts ricocheting off surfaces that analysis proved should not have reflected energy weapons. 1 trooper's armor had simply fallen apart while he was standing still, the seals and fasteners giving way simultaneously as if they'd all reached the end of their service life at the exact same moment. And in the middle of the garrison's central courtyard, sitting on a bench that no one remembered installing, was the boy. Charlie Brown looked up as Pollux approached, flanked by 6 very nervous stormtroopers. The boy's expression was one of profound, existential sadness, the look of someone who had seen this scene play out many times before and knew exactly how it would end. "I can explain," Charlie Brown said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe any explanation would help. "You will explain," Pollux said, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Starting with what you are, where you came from, and what you've done to my garrison." "I'm Charlie Brown," the boy said simply. This was Snoopy's idea. We were in my backyard, and he was up on his doghouse again, pretending to be the flying ace. And I was trying to tell him it was time for dinner, and then, he gestured vaguely at the sky. Everything got weird. "Weird doesn't explain how a primitive wooden structure survived atmospheric entry," Pollux said. "It doesn't explain how your companion was able to pilot a TIE fighter with no training. It doesn't explain the cascade of equipment failures that began the moment you arrived." Charlie Brown sighed. Yeah. That happens a lot, actually. Things just sort of go wrong around me. I'm used to it. Usually it's just baseballs going through windows or kites getting stuck in trees, but I guess in space it's. He looked around at the damaged warehouse, the scattered equipment, the stressed garrison commander. Bigger. One of the stormtroopers' rifles chose that moment to jam, the power cell ejecting spontaneously and clattering across the ferrocrete. See? Charlie Brown said miserably. I'm sorry. I really am. This isn't your fault. It's mine. It's always mine. Pollock studied the boy for a long moment. In his 15 years of Imperial service, he'd encountered many things: rebel spies, smugglers, Force-sensitive individuals the Inquisitors came to collect. But he'd never encountered anyone who radiated such genuine, apologetic helplessness while simultaneously being the apparent cause of systemic chaos. You're coming with me, Pollock finally said. Both of you. This is beyond my authority to handle. Snoopy's coming back, Charlie Brown said, pointing at the sky where a TIE fighter was descending, far too rapidly and at completely the wrong angle, toward the landing pad. He always comes back. Usually right before everything gets worse. The TIE fighter touched down with surprising gentleness despite its approach trajectory. Snoopy hopped out of the cockpit, still wearing his flight goggles, and trotted over to Charlie Brown with evident satisfaction. He sat beside the boy, tail wagging, completely oblivious to the dozen weapons now trained on him. Charlie Brown reached down and scratched behind Snoopy's ears. Did you have fun? Snoopy's thought bubble, still invisible to everyone but somehow creating a localized distortion in the force that made nearby personnel feel vaguely uneasy, read, the Red Baron never stood a chance. We need to go home, Charlie Brown said quietly. Before something really bad happens. Commander Pollux, who had just received a report that the garrison's main generator was now operating at 60% efficiency for no identifiable reason, couldn't agree more. Unfortunately, he had no idea how to send these two back to wherever they came from. And he had a growing suspicion that keeping them here was going to end very, very badly. He was preparing to have them transferred to a holding cell when the communications array, miraculously functioning again, crackled to life with a priority transmission. This is Imperial Star Destroyer Devastator, a cold, mechanical voice announced. We are assuming orbit over Rannon 4. Commander Pollux, you will prepare the anomalies for immediate transfer to our custody. Lord Vader wishes to question them personally. Charlie Brown's face went pale. Even in a galaxy far, far away, even having never heard of Darth Vader, some names carry a weight that transcends knowledge. Who's Lord Vader? He asked quietly. Pollux didn't answer. He was too busy wondering if his career could possibly survive whatever was about to happen next. In orbit above, aboard the Devastator, Darth Vader stood in the observation deck, staring down at the planet below. Through the Force, he reached out toward the garrison, searching for the presence he'd felt, the blank space, the wrongness that had drawn him across star systems. He found nothing. Not emptiness, which would imply absence. Not darkness, which would imply the Sith. Not light, which would imply the Jedi. He found something that shouldn't exist, a space where the Force simply ended. Replaced by rules he didn't understand. Vader's breathing filled the silence of the observation deck, steady and ominous. Interesting, he said softly. Behind him, Admiral Kendall Ozzel shifted uncomfortably. My lord, the garrison reports that the intruders have caused significant equipment malfunctions. Perhaps they possess some form of technological sabotage device. No, Vader said, still staring at the planet. This is something else. Something I have never encountered. He turned to face Ozzel. Prepare a shuttle. I will retrieve them myself. My lord, is that wise? If they possess weapons capable of. Vader raised one gloved hand. Ozzel's words cut off as an invisible grip closed around his throat, not tightly enough to kill, merely to remind. Do not question me, Admiral. Ozzel nodded frantically. Vader released him. As the Dark Lord of the Sith departed for the hangar bay, none of the crew aboard the Devastator noticed the small malfunctions beginning to spread through the ship's systems. A navigation computer displaying coordinates that didn't exist. A turbolift arriving at the wrong deck. A coffee dispenser in the officer's mess producing chocolate milk. Small things. Insignificant things. The kind of things that, if you'd grown up in a certain neighborhood reading a certain comic strip, you'd recognize as the early warning signs that Charlie Brown was in your vicinity. And things were about to go very, very wrong. The Lambda-class shuttle descended through Rannon IV's atmosphere with the measured precision of Imperial engineering. Inside, Darth Vader stood motionless in the passenger compartment, his presence filling the space like a gravitational well. The pilot and co-pilot spoke only in necessary technical confirmations, their voices hushed. No one spoke unnecessarily around Lord Vader. No one who valued their continued survival. 3 minutes from landing. The shuttle's starboard stabilizer began vibrating at a frequency not listed in any maintenance manual. My lord, the pilot ventured carefully, we're experiencing minor turbulence. Nothing serious, but... Continue, Vader commanded. The vibration stopped. The port stabilizer immediately began making a sound like a distressed womp rat. The pilot and co-pilot exchanged glances. In 15 years of flying Imperial craft, neither had experienced mechanical sympathy failure, when one system's malfunction spontaneously transfers to another unconnected system. Because mechanical sympathy failure wasn't a real phenomenon. Machines didn't work that way. Except, apparently, when approaching whatever was waiting at the garrison below. The shuttle landed without further incident, though the boarding ramp extended in jerky, hesitant movements as if the hydraulics were reluctant to complete their function. Vader descended into the Rannon 4 sunlight, his black armor and cape absorbing the red-tinged rays, his breathing apparatus marking time like a countdown. Commander Pollock stood at attention, flanked by his remaining functional stormtroopers. Behind them, sitting on the same bench under guard, were the source of all his recent troubles, a round-headed boy and a beagle wearing flight goggles. Vader approached, and Charlie Brown looked up. Their eyes met, the innocently despairing gaze of a child who expected disappointment meeting the cold, emotionless lenses of a man who had transcended such human weakness through suffering and rage. In the Force, Vader reached out to probe the boy's mind, to sift through his thoughts and intentions, to understand what manner of being could create the distortion he'd sensed across star systems. The Force stopped. Not blocked, as when facing another Force-sensitive who had erected mental shields. Not absent, as when near the Ysalamiri creatures that created Force-neutral bubbles. Simply stopped, as if it had encountered a boundary it couldn't comprehend, a wall made of something that wasn't matter or energy but pure, concentrated wrongness. Vader's hand twitched, an involuntary movement that none present had ever seen from the Dark Lord. Who are you? Vader's voice emerged from his vocabulator with its characteristic mechanical rasp. Charlie Brown, the boy answered, standing up slowly. His voice carried no defiance, no fear exactly, just a weary resignation. And this is Snoopy. We're trying to get home. We're not here to cause trouble. Trouble just sort of follows us. Especially me. Snoopy, meanwhile, was studying Vader with evident interest. The beagle cocked his head, taking in the armor, the cape, the breathing apparatus. His thought bubble, still invisible to everyone but creating a faint, inexplicable pressure in the Force, read, interesting costume. Though the breathing thing seems a bit dramatic. You arrived in a primitive structure that defied atmospheric entry physics, Vader stated. Your companion piloted an Imperial fighter with impossible skill. And since your arrival, this garrison has experienced 17 separate system failures across unconnected technological platforms. He took one step closer. You will explain how this is possible. Charlie Brown spread his hands helplessly. I can't explain it. Things just go wrong around me. They always have. Back home, if I try to fly a kite, it gets stuck in a tree. If I try to kick a football, someone pulls it away at the last second. If I play baseball, we lose. Every time. He looked down at his shoes. I'm used to it. But I guess here, where everything's more complicated, the things that go wrong are more complicated too. You expect me to believe, Vader said, his voice dropping to a tone that had preceded the deaths of admirals and generals, that you are causing systemic technological failure through mere bad luck? I know how it sounds, Charlie Brown said quietly. I wouldn't believe it either. But it's true. It's always been true. Behind Vader, the shuttle's boarding ramp suddenly collapsed, hydraulics failing completely. The crash echoed across the courtyard. No one moved. Bring them aboard the Devastator, Vader commanded finally. The Emperor will want to examine them. If they are weapons, we will understand how they function. If they are force-sensitive anomalies, they will be contained. If they are simply children playing games they don't understand, he paused. They will be dealt with accordingly. My lord, Pollux interjected carefully, perhaps it would be wiser to keep them planetside, in a contained facility. Given the equipment failures. Vader turned his masked face toward the commander. Are you suggesting that the Empire's flagship cannot contain a child and an animal? Pollux wisely said nothing further. Prepare them for transport, Vader ordered. He turned and began walking back toward his shuttle, then paused. And Commander? Repair your garrison. I expect it to be fully operational within the week. Pollux looked at the damaged warehouse, the mysteriously stressed support columns, the maintenance logs showing impossible failure cascades, and felt his military career crumbling around him like the warehouse's structural integrity. Yes, my lord. 20 minutes later, Charlie Brown and Snoopy found themselves aboard an Imperial shuttle, a different one, since Vader's had developed a concerning grinding sound in the main engine, ascending toward orbit. Through the viewport, they could see Rannon 4 falling away below them, and above, growing larger with each passing moment, the wedge-shaped immensity of a star destroyer. Charlie Brown pressed his face against the viewport. Good grief. That's the biggest thing I've ever seen. Snoopy, sitting beside him, seemed less impressed. He'd fought bigger enemies in his imagination. Though he had to admit, the sheer scale was admirable. The Red Baron would have needed a much larger plane to challenge something like that. What do you think they'll do to us? Charlie Brown asked quietly. Snoopy's thought bubble read, whatever it is, we'll handle it. We always do. Charlie Brown managed a small, sad smile. You're right. We'll figure something out. We always figure something out. The smile faded. Usually right after everything goes completely wrong. The shuttle began its final approach to the Devastator's hangar bay. As it crossed the magnetic containment field, a curious thing happened. 3 TIE fighters on maintenance racks simultaneously developed identical hydraulic leaks. A cargo loader's repulsor lift field inverted briefly, causing a crate of spare parts to float ceilingward before crashing down. A technician's datapad displayed its entire operating system in reverse alphabetical order. In the command bridge high above the hangar, Admiral Ozzel received the first in what would become a flood of minor malfunction reports. He dismissed them as coincidence, statistical clustering, the inevitable result of operating complex machinery. Star destroyers had thousands of systems. A few failures were normal. He had no way of knowing that he was watching the early stages of an infection, not biological, not digital, but conceptual. The laws governing Charlie Brown's universe were beginning to contaminate the laws governing the Star Wars galaxy, and the Devastator was ground zero. In his meditation chamber, Vader felt the disturbance growing stronger. The blank space where the Force couldn't reach was now aboard his ship, and it was spreading. Slowly. Subtly. Like a poison that didn't kill but simply made everything slightly wrong. He ignited his lightsaber, the red blade casting bloody light across the chamber's interior. Through the Force, he reached out, searching for any explanation, any precedent, any ancient Sith knowledge that could explain what these intruders represented. He found nothing but questions. And for the first time in many years, Darth Vader, former Jedi Knight, Sith Lord, enforcer of the Emperor's will, felt something he'd almost forgotten: uncertainty. In the hangar bay below, Charlie Brown stepped off the shuttle onto the polished deck of the Devastator, Snoopy trotting at his heels. Stormtroopers surrounded them immediately, weapons trained but not yet raised to firing position. "Where are you taking us?" Charlie Brown asked the nearest trooper. "Detention level," the filtered voice replied. "You'll be held there until Lord Vader is ready to question you further." Charlie Brown nodded slowly. "Okay. That's fair. We did sort of crash here without permission." He paused. "Does the detention level have food?" Snoopy gets cranky when he's hungry. And when Snoopy gets cranky, things tend to get. The hangar bay's main lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then steadied. "Complicated," Charlie Brown finished quietly. The stormtrooper who'd spoken looked at his companions. Some unspoken communication passed between them, the kind of wordless agreement that comes from shared service in dangerous situations. They were all thinking the same thing: whatever these prisoners were, detention level wasn't going to hold them. Not in any way that mattered. But orders were orders. They began escorting Charlie Brown and Snoopy deeper into the Star Destroyer, into the maze of corridors and chambers that formed the Empire's floating fortress. Behind them, in the hangar, a fuel line began leaking. Just a small leak. Nothing dangerous. Yet. The detention level of the Devastator was designed to hold the Empire's most dangerous enemies: rebel spies, captured Jedi, political dissidents whose silence had become necessary. The cells featured reinforced durasteel walls, energy shields capable of deflecting blaster fire, and monitoring systems that recorded every breath, every movement, every whispered word. Cell 2187 now held a boy and his dog. Charlie Brown sat on the narrow bench that served as the cell's only furniture, his legs dangling above the floor. Snoopy had claimed the bench's opposite end, curled into a comfortable ball, apparently unbothered by their imprisonment. Outside the energy field that sealed the cell entrance, two stormtroopers stood guard, their white armor gleaming under the harsh detention level lighting. "I should have stayed home," Charlie Brown said to no one in particular. "I should have just let you stay on your doghouse. But no, I had to go check on you. And now we're in a space prison." He put his head in his hands. "My team's going to forfeit the game tomorrow. Not that we would have won anyway." Snoopy opened one eye, regarded his owner with what might have been sympathy or might have been drowsiness, then closed it again. "Prisoner will remain silent," one of the guards said mechanically. Charlie Brown fell silent. For approximately 3 minutes. Then the lights began to flicker. Not the dramatic, horror film flickering that might indicate a power failure or attack. More like the uncertain pulsing of fluorescent lights in a school hallway, irritating, inconsistent, the kind of malfunction that wasn't serious enough to warrant immediate repair but was certainly serious enough to drive people slowly insane. The guard on the left, designation TK-447, felt his helmet's internal display begin showing static around the edges. Nothing that impaired his vision. Just, there. Persistent. Wrong. TK-447 to detention control, he said into his comlink. "We're experiencing minor power fluctuations in cell block AA-23. Requesting maintenance check." "Negative, TK-447, the response came. "All systems showing normal. No fluctuations detected." TK-447 looked at the flickering lights. At his static-laced display. At the cell's energy field, which was now oscillating between two slightly different shades of blue. "Control, I'm looking at the fluctuations right now. The lights are. All systems normal," Control repeated, a note of irritation creeping into the officer's voice. "Maintain your post." TK-447 exchanged a glance with his partner, TK-622. Through their helmet's internal comm links, private from control, TK-622 whispered, "Ever since they brought these two aboard, things have been off." "Off how?" "My locker won't open. The CAF dispenser gave me blue milk when I selected regular. Turbolift took me to the wrong deck twice. Small stuff, but..." "All systems normal," TK-447 said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it any more than his partner did. Inside the cell, Charlie Brown had stood up and was examining the walls with the careful attention of someone who had spent significant time in predicaments of his own making. "There has to be a way out," he muttered. "There's always a way out. Usually it involves something breaking at exactly the wrong time, but..." The energy field made a sound like electronic indigestion and briefly turned purple. Both guards raised their weapons. "Step away from the field, prisoner." Charlie Brown jumped back, hands raised. "I didn't touch it. I didn't touch anything. It just did that." The field returned to its normal blue. Then flickered purple again. Then settled into an uncertain violet that suggested it couldn't quite make up its mind what color it wanted to be. "Control, we need a technician down here immediately," TK-447 said, no longer bothering to hide the urgency in his voice. "The containment field for cell 2187 is malfunctioning. All systems normal." Control said again, each word emphasized with the patience of someone dealing with idiots. "If you cannot maintain your post without filing false maintenance reports." The comm link died mid-sentence. TK-447 tapped his helmet. "Control. Control, do you copy?" "Nothing." He tried the backup frequency. Static. He tried the emergency channel. More static, but with an odd musical quality, as if somewhere in the white noise was the faint sound of someone playing a piano very, very badly. "This is wrong," TK-622 said flatly. "This is all wrong. We should request reassignment. We should." The detention level's main corridor lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in red. But the red lights were flickering too, creating a strobe effect that made movement seem jerky and surreal. And in that strobing red darkness, footsteps echoed from the corridor's far end. Measured. Mechanical. Accompanied by the rhythmic sound of breathing apparatus. Vader had come to conduct his interrogation personally. The Dark Lord emerged from the shadows like a nightmare taking physical form, his cape billowing behind him despite the absence of any breeze, his helmet's lenses reflecting the red emergency lights like demonic eyes. The two stormtroopers snapped to attention so quickly that TK-622 nearly dropped his rifle. "My lord," TK-447 managed. Vader ignored them. His attention was fixed entirely on the cell before him, on the boy standing at its center and the dog that had now woken up and was regarding him with curious interest. "Lower the field," Vader commanded. "My lord, the field is experiencing malfunctions." "I am aware." Vader raised one gloved hand. Through the Force, he reached out toward the energy field's control mechanism, prepared to simply switch it off through sheer will. The mechanism exploded in a shower of sparks. The field didn't deactivate. It intensified, brightening from violet to blazing white. Crackling with energy that should have required 10 times the power input. Then, just as suddenly, it vanished completely, leaving nothing between Vader and the prisoners except empty air. In the Force, Vader felt absolutely nothing from the boy. Not fear. Not defiance. Not even the baseline presence that every living thing possessed. It was as if Charlie Brown existed in a pocket of space where the Force had simply given up and gone elsewhere. "You," Vader said, his voice carrying the weight of threat and promise, "are an impossibility." "I get that a lot," Charlie Brown said quietly. "Not the impossibility part specifically, but people tell me I'm unusual. Different. That I have a dark cloud hanging over me. He looked up at the towering Sith Lord. Are you going to hurt us? That depends, Vader replied, on whether you cooperate. I have questions. You will answer them. If you lie, I will know. If you resist. Snoopy hopped off the bench and trotted directly toward Vader, his tail wagging. The stormtroopers raised their weapons. Vader raised his hand, signaling them to hold fire. The beagle stopped at Vader's feet, sat down, and looked up expectantly, as if waiting for a treat or perhaps a pat on the head. Vader stared down at the animal. In all his years, as Anakin Skywalker, as Vader, through battles and betrayals and the deaths of everything he'd once loved, he had never encountered a creature that looked at him with such absolute lack of fear. Most beings cowered. Some resisted. None simply sat and wagged their tail. Your companion appears to lack survival instincts, Vader observed. He thinks you're interesting, Charlie Brown said. Snoopy likes interesting things. He's got a big imagination. Sometimes too big. Vader reached down with the Force, attempting to probe the beagle's mind, to understand what manner of creature could remain so calm in his presence. The Force recoiled. Not blocked. Not absent. Recoiled, as if touching something that burned or poisoned or fundamentally contradicted its nature. Vader's breathing quickened, the respirator's rhythm accelerating. In 30 years of service to the dark side, he had never felt the Force react this way. It was afraid. The Force itself was afraid of a small dog in flight goggles. What are you? Vader asked, and for the first time in decades, the question held genuine uncertainty rather than rhetorical intimidation. Snoopy's thought bubble read, just a World War I flying ace, looking for the Red Baron. The thought bubble, of course, was invisible. But in the Force, its meaning somehow registered anyway, a concept without words, an intention without thought, a purpose that made absolutely no sense but was nonetheless completely sincere. My lord, TK-447 ventured carefully, should we contact? Every comm link on the detention level simultaneously switched on and began playing what sounded like someone attempting to practice piano scales. Badly. Very, very badly. Vader turned, his cape sweeping dramatically. Seal this level. No one enters or leaves without my express authorization. I am taking the prisoners to the interrogation chamber. My lord, the interrogation chamber's systems are malfunctioning. Yes. Vader's vocabulator somehow conveyed bitter resignation. Everything is malfunctioning. But I will have answers before this vessel falls apart around us. He reached out with the Force, preparing to levitate the boy and the beagle, to move them through pure telekinetic will toward wherever he chose to take them. The Force refused. Not couldn't. Refused. As if it were a horse being forced toward a cliff edge, some ancient survival instinct overriding its training and insisting, no, not that, anything but that. Vader lowered his hand. Walk, he commanded instead. Both of you. You will accompany me willingly, or I will have you dragged. Charlie Brown nodded and walked out of the cell. Snoopy trotting at his heels. As they passed Vader, the Dark Lord fell into step behind them, his presence looming like a thundercloud. They proceeded down the corridor, an impossible procession, a boy, a dog, and one of the most feared beings in the galaxy, walking through red-lit passages while all around them systems continued their slow, inexorable breakdown. Behind them, in cell 2187, the bench suddenly folded in half for no reason anyone would ever be able to explain. In the ship's engine room, a technician noticed that reactor efficiency had dropped another 2%. In the officers' mess, the CAF dispensers began dispensing nothing but blue milk, regardless of what anyone selected. And aboard a distant rebel cruiser, monitoring Imperial communications, an intelligence officer intercepted a transmission fragment that made no sense. Systems failing, no apparent cause, prisoners somehow. The transmission cut off mid-word, dissolved into static, and never resumed. The rebellion filed it as an anomaly, possibly a malfunction in their own equipment. They had no idea they were witnessing the opening shots of an invasion, not of ships and soldiers, but of physics itself. The interrogation chamber was located deep within the Devastator's superstructure, a windowless room designed for extracting information from even the most resistant subjects. Medical droids stood in alcoves, their syringes filled with truth serums ranging from mild sedatives to compounds that would make a subject forget their own name. Restraint mechanisms lined the walls. The central chair featured neural probes that could interface directly with a prisoner's nervous system. It was a place designed to break minds and spirits with ruthless Imperial efficiency. Charlie Brown sat in the interrogation chair, looking small and miserable. The restraints wouldn't close. Vader had attempted to activate them 3 times. Each time, the mechanisms began their automatic sequence, reached halfway, and simply stopped, frozen in place as if they'd forgotten what they were supposed to be doing. One restraint had actually reversed direction and tried to open further, nearly detaching from its mounting entirely. "This is unprecedented," the interrogation officer, a thin man with the permanent squint of someone who spent too much time reviewing psychological profiles, said nervously. "The chair has never malfunctioned. Ever. It's one of the most reliable systems on the ship." "Everything on this ship is becoming unreliable," Vader said, his tone carrying the promise of consequences. "Proceed without the restraints." "My lord, without proper restraint, if the subject becomes violent." Vader turned his masked face toward the officer. The unspoken threat in that gaze was sufficient. The officer swallowed and approached Charlie Brown with a handheld medical scanner. "I'm not going to become violent," Charlie Brown said quietly. "I've never been violent. I'm not very good at it." He looked down at his hands. "I'm not very good at much, actually." The medical scanner activated, running through its diagnostic sequences. It measured heart rate, respiration, neural activity, hormonal levels, all the biological markers that might indicate deception or hostility. The display showed results that made the interrogation officer blink several times in confusion. "My lord, according to these readings, the subject is experiencing mild depression, low self-esteem, and significant anxiety, but absolutely no aggression, no deceptive intent, and no indication of force sensitivity." He looked up from the scanner. "He's just sad." "Sadness can be a weapon," Vader said. "Depression can mask calculation. Run a full-spectrum analysis." The officer did so. The scanner made an unhappy beeping sound and displayed an error message. "Biological readings inconsistent with known species database. Recommend recalibration." "The scanner is malfunctioning now too," the officer said, his voice climbing toward panic. "My lord, I've conducted thousands of interrogations. I've never seen equipment failures like this." Snoopy, meanwhile, had wandered over to one of the medical droids and was sniffing its base with evident curiosity. The droid, programmed to remain stationary unless activated, began moving of its own accord, small jerky movements, as if it were trying to step away from the beagle but couldn't quite commit to the action. "Get that animal away from the equipment," the officer snapped at the 2 guards who'd accompanied them. The guards approached Snoopy. One reached down to grab him. Snoopy, with the casual grace that only dogs possess, simply wasn't there anymore. He trotted 3 steps to the left, perfectly avoiding capture while never seeming to hurry. The guard stumbled, caught off balance by his target's absence. His partner moved to intercept, and Snoopy repeated the maneuver, this time moving right. It looked like a game. It looked innocent. But after 30 seconds of watching 2 trained stormtroopers fail to capture a single small dog in an enclosed room, it stopped looking innocent and started looking like something else entirely. Like reality was favoring the beagle. Like the universe itself was gently, politely declining to let them succeed. "Enough," Vader commanded. The force surged around him, a crushing pressure that should have frozen every living thing in the room with primal fear. Charlie Brown flinched. The guard stiffened to attention. The interrogation officer stopped breathing momentarily. Snoopy cocked his head and continued exploring the room, utterly unaffected. Vader's breathing apparatus filled the silence. In. Out. In. Out. Each breath carrying the weight of barely controlled fury. You, he said, focusing on Charlie Brown, will tell me how you came to be in this galaxy. You will explain the nature of your companion. You will provide actionable intelligence regarding your origins, your capabilities, and your intentions. And you will do so immediately. Charlie Brown met Vader's gaze, or at least, met the blank lenses of his helmet. I don't know how we got here. We were in my backyard. Snoopy was on his doghouse pretending to be a World War I pilot. He does that. I was calling him for dinner. And then everything got weird. There was this feeling like falling, except in all directions at once, and then we were falling for real, and then we crashed. You expect me to believe you traveled across dimensional boundaries by accident? I don't expect you to believe anything, Charlie Brown said, and his voice carried such genuine resignation that even through Vader's rage, something recognized it as truth. Nobody ever believes me. When I tell people about my baseball team losing 47 games in a row, they think I'm exaggerating. When I explain that my kite has never, not once, successfully flown without getting tangled in a tree, they think I'm being dramatic. But it's all true. All of it. He slumped in the chair. My life is just one long series of things going wrong. The interrogation officer glanced at his scanner again. Every indicator suggested the boy was telling the truth, or at least, believed he was telling the truth with such conviction that no deception could be detected. My lord, the officer said carefully, I believe he's being honest. There's no indication of. The medical droid that Snoopy had been investigating suddenly activated all its appendages at once. Syringes extended. Scanners deployed. Its visual sensor rotated 360 degrees, faster and faster, until it was spinning like a mechanical top. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Every appendage retracted. The visual sensor locked forward. And the droid began moving backward, away from Snoopy. Until it backed directly into the wall and simply kept trying to reverse, its treads whirring uselessly against the immovable durasteel. This is insane, the officer whispered. Droids don't behave like this. They can't. They can, Vader interrupted, when exposed to an anomaly that redefines what "can" means. He turned his attention back to Charlie Brown. If your presence causes technological failure, you are a weapon. Intentional or not, the result is the same. The Emperor will want to study this phenomenon. To understand it. To potentially replicate it. Charlie Brown's eyes widened. No. No, please, you can't, I just want to go home. We both do. We don't want to be weapons or experiments or anything like that. We just want. The lights went out. Not the flickering, hesitant failure they'd been experiencing. A complete, instantaneous blackout that plunged the interrogation chamber into absolute darkness. The emergency lighting didn't activate. The backup systems didn't engage. There was only darkness and the sound of Vader's mechanical breathing. My lord, one of the guards called out, his voice tight with barely suppressed fear. Through the Force, Vader could sense positions, the guards flanking the door, the interrogation officer frozen near the medical equipment, Charlie Brown still sitting in the chair, and Snoopy. Snoopy was directly in front of him. The beagle had crossed the room in the darkness with perfect confidence, and now stood less than a meter from the Dark Lord of the Sith. Vader could sense no hostility, no aggression. Just presence. And underneath that presence, like a fundamental truth too strange to fully comprehend, was the absolute certainty that this small dog feared nothing because in his world, there was nothing to fear. Every danger was make-believe. Every threat was imaginary. Every villain was just the Red Baron waiting to be defeated in glorious aerial combat. The lights returned. Not the interrogation chamber's lights. Those remained dead. Instead, the room was illuminated by a soft blue glow emanating from no identifiable source, casting long shadows that moved wrong, tilted at angles that didn't match the light's direction. "Good grief," Charlie Brown said, staring at the impossible illumination. "What's happening?" Vader knew. On some level deeper than logic or training, he understood. The galaxy they inhabited operated on certain fundamental rules: physics, energy conservation, causality. Charlie Brown and Snoopy operated on different rules. And when two incompatible sets of rules occupied the same space, reality had to make a choice about which to obey. Reality was choosing wrong. "We're leaving," Vader announced. "Both of you will be confined to a secure location until the Emperor arrives to examine you personally. Guards, escort them to." The interrogation chamber door opened. No one had activated it. No one was standing at the external controls. It simply opened, the heavy durasteel panels sliding apart with smooth mechanical precision, revealing the corridor beyond. Where dozens of stormtroopers stood waiting, their weapons raised. "Lord Vader," the squad leader said, his voice filtered through his helmet. "We've been ordered to secure this level. There's been he paused. "An incident in the main hangar bay." "What kind of incident?" "Sir, 3 TIE fighters launched without pilots. They've been performing aerial maneuvers around the ship for the past 10 minutes. We can't get them to respond to communications, and we can't shoot them down without potentially damaging the Devastator itself." Vader turned slowly to look at Snoopy. The Beagle's thought bubble read, "The Red Baron must have friends. This is excellent." "Did you," Vader asked with terrible calm, "somehow activate Imperial fighters remotely?" Snoopy's tail wagged. "He thinks they're playing with him," Charlie Brown translated miserably. "He thinks they're other flying aces. He thinks it's a game." "It is not," Vader said, each word carrying the weight of a death sentence, "a game. Somewhere deep in the Devastator's systems, something critical gave way. Not catastrophically. Not yet. Just one more failure in a cascade that had been building since Charlie Brown and Snoopy came aboard. A power relay that governed secondary systems. Minor. Insignificant. Except that relay also controlled gravity compensators in sections 7 through 12. In the officers' mess 3 decks above, Captain Lennox was raising a cup of CAF to his lips when gravity simply stopped. The CAF formed a perfect sphere in midair. Lennox floated upward, along with every other officer in the room, their arms windmilling uselessly as they drifted toward the ceiling. The gravity returned 5 seconds later. Everyone fell. The CAF fell. Chaos. And in the interrogation chamber, Charlie Brown looked at Vader and said with absolute, soul-crushing certainty, "It's getting worse, isn't it? It always gets worse before it gets better. If it gets better. Sometimes it just stays worse." Vader said nothing. But his breathing had accelerated again, the respirator working harder, and if one looked closely, though none dared to, one might have seen his gloved hands clench into fists. Admiral Ozzel stood in the command bridge of the Devastator, staring at status displays that made increasingly less sense with each passing minute. His junior officers clustered around their stations, their voices rising in barely controlled alarm as they reported failures cascading through systems that should have been entirely independent of one another. Gravity compensators in sections 7 through 12 have experienced complete failure and restoration, Lieutenant Tharsk reported. Engineering reports no mechanical cause. The system simply stopped working, then started again. Turbolifts on decks 5, 9, and 14 are traveling to incorrect destinations, another officer added. One lift is reportedly moving sideways. Sir, the hangar bay reports that 3 TIE fighters are still performing unauthorized maneuvers. They're executing combat patterns that our pilots say are impossible, too tight, too fast, defying G-force limitations. And, Tharsk continued, his voice climbing toward panic, the main reactor is now operating at 73% efficiency. Engineering cannot explain the power loss. They've run every diagnostic. Everything tests normal, but the output continues to drop. Ozzel turned from the viewport where he'd been watching the 3 rogue TIE fighters loop and spiral around the Star Destroyer like birds playing in wind currents. How long until Lord Vader returns from the detention level? He's already en route to the bridge, sir. With the prisoners. Good. Perhaps he can explain. The main view screen flickered, displayed an image of a tree for no apparent reason, then returned to its normal view of empty space. Several officers glanced at it, then at each other, then quickly back at their stations, hoping no one had noticed their concern. Everyone had noticed. The turbolift doors opened. Vader emerged, his cape billowing dramatically despite the bridge's stable atmosphere. Behind him walked Charlie Brown, looking small and overwhelmed by the military efficiency surrounding him. Snoopy trotted alongside, his flight goggles still perched on his head, taking in the bridge with the calm interest of someone touring a museum. Every officer on the bridge stiffened to attention. "Admiral," Vader said, his voice cutting through the bridge's controlled chaos, "status report." Ozzel gestured at the displays. "My lord, we're experiencing system-wide malfunctions of unknown origin. No pattern to the failures. No common cause we can identify. It's as if the ship itself is becoming unreliable." "The ship is not becoming unreliable," Vader said. "Reality is becoming unreliable. These two," he gestured at Charlie Brown and Snoopy, "exist according to rules that contradict our own. Their presence aboard this vessel is causing a fundamental conflict between how things should work and how they do work." Ozzel stared at the boy and the beagle. "My lord, with respect, they're just." One of the bridge consoles exploded in a shower of sparks. Not violently. Almost apologetically, as if the equipment were embarrassed about failing. The officer manning it leaped back, patting out small flames on his uniform. "They're just catastrophically unlucky," Vader finished for him. "And their bad luck operates at a scale we cannot contain." Charlie Brown raised his hand tentatively, like a student in class. Excuse me? I don't mean to interrupt, but maybe if you just let us go back to where we crashed, we could try to get home. Snoopy's doghouse is still there, right? Maybe if we just... The structure you arrived in, Vader said, was confiscated and transported to our research facility. It is currently being analyzed by our top scientists. Charlie Brown's face went pale. "You took Snoopy's doghouse?" Snoopy's ears perked up. His thought bubble, invisible to everyone but somehow creating a pressure in the force that made several bridge officers reach for headache medication, read, "They took my house?" "My house?" "Standard procedure," Ozzel said dismissively. "All unknown technology is seized for Imperial." The view screen flickered again. This time instead of a tree, it showed what appeared to be a small red doghouse sitting in a sterile white laboratory, surrounded by scientists in Imperial uniforms prodding it with various instruments. "That's not possible," Lieutenant Tharsk said, staring at the screen. "That's a live feed from Research Station Obsidian. That station is 6 systems away. We don't have real-time connection to..." The image zoomed in on one scientist who was attempting to take a structural sample from the doghouse with a laser cutter. The laser cutter sparked, sputtered, and died. The scientist set it down and picked up a different tool. That tool immediately fell apart in his hands, screws spinning out in all directions like they'd been magnetized to repel their housing. Snoopy's thought bubble read, "Nobody messes with my house." On the view screen, every piece of equipment in the laboratory simultaneously malfunctioned. Scanners displayed nonsense data. Computers rebooted themselves in loops. One scientist's datapad began playing what sounded like piano music, badly performed piano music, at maximum volume. "Turn that off," Ozzel ordered, pointing at the view screen. "I'm trying," "Sir," the communications officer said, his hands dancing over controls. "The system isn't responding. We're locked into this feed." In the laboratory 6 systems away, the scientists were evacuating. Through the silent feed, they could be seen running for the exits, leaving the doghouse sitting peacefully in the center of the room, completely undamaged and utterly untouchable. The view screen went black. Then returned to its normal view of space. Vader stood motionless, his breathing the only sound on the suddenly quiet bridge. Through the Force, he reached out, not toward Charlie Brown or Snoopy, he'd learned that lesson, but toward the ship itself, trying to sense the extent of the contamination, the spread of this reality-warping influence. What he felt made him deeply, profoundly concerned in a way that even the Emperor's most dangerous commands had never achieved. The Devastator was dying. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But inevitably. Every system, every circuit, every mechanical component was slowly forgetting how to function properly. And the longer these two remained aboard, the worse it would become. "Admiral," Vader said quietly, "how long until we reach Coruscant?" "At current speed, 18 hours, my lord." "And if we increased to maximum hyperspeed?" 12 hours, but I wouldn't recommend. Do it. I want these prisoners off this vessel and in the Emperor's custody as soon as possible." Vader turned to face Charlie Brown. "You will remain on the bridge where I can observe you directly. Any attempt to escape, any further sabotage." "I'm not sabotaging anything," Charlie Brown protested. "Things just go wrong around me. I don't want them to. I don't try to make them go wrong. They just do." His voice cracked slightly. "Do you think I enjoy this? Do you think I like watching everything fall apart wherever I go?" For a moment, just a moment, Vader said nothing. In the boy's voice, he heard something familiar. The anguish of someone who carried a burden they never asked for. The exhaustion of being blamed for circumstances beyond their control. The loneliness of being the catalyst for disaster. He remembered a young man on Mustafar, burning, screaming that this wasn't his fault, that he tried to do the right thing, that everything had just gone so terribly wrong. "No," Vader said finally. "I don't believe you enjoy it. But enjoyment is irrelevant. You are a threat to the Empire. To order. To the stability of this galaxy. And threats must be contained or eliminated." "My lord," Lieutenant Tharsk interrupted hesitantly, "we're receiving a transmission from the research station. They're requesting immediate evacuation. They say the facility is experiencing catastrophic system failures. Life support is failing. Containment fields are dropping. They're abandoning the station." Vader turned his masked face toward Snoopy. The beagle sat calmly near Charlie Brown's feet, showing no awareness that he'd just caused the abandonment of an entire Imperial research facility. "The doghouse?" Vader asked. "Still in the laboratory, my lord. Completely intact. They couldn't study it, couldn't move it, couldn't even successfully scan it. Every attempt resulted in equipment failure." "Retrieve it," Vader commanded. "Have it transported here via cargo freighter. If we return it to them, perhaps you'll let us go home?" Charlie Brown asked, hope flickering in his voice. "I will deliver you to the Emperor as ordered," Vader said. "What happens after that is not my concern." The hope in Charlie Brown's expression died. "Oh. Right. Of course." Snoopy's thought bubble read, "Don't worry, round-headed kid. We've been in tougher spots." Charlie Brown looked down at his dog. "Name one time we've been captured by an evil space empire." Snoopy's thought bubble paused thoughtfully, then, "Okay, this is new. But the principle is the same." "Admiral," Vader said, turning away from the prisoners, "increase speed to maximum. And I want damage control teams on standby throughout the ship. When, more systems fail, I want immediate response." "Yes, my lord." The Devastator's engines powered up, driving the massive Star Destroyer faster through the void. On the bridge, officers returned to their stations, monitoring systems that grew less reliable with each passing minute. Maintenance alerts appeared on displays with increasing frequency, minor malfunctions, each one insignificant individually, but collectively painting a picture of a vessel coming apart at the seams. In engineering, Chief Vol now watched his reactor efficiency readouts with growing dread. 70% now. Dropping 1% every 20 minutes. At this rate, they'd lose primary power before reaching Coruscant. He'd already dispatched every technician he had, checking connections, testing systems, searching desperately for the cause. They found nothing. Because there was nothing to find. The reactor wasn't broken. It was just, unlucky. In the hangar bay, the 3 rogue TIE fighters finally stopped their aerial display and returned to their docking stations, powering down as if their joyride had never happened. The flight crew approached them cautiously, expecting to find some sophisticated override system, some hacker's device, some explanation. They found empty cockpits. The fighters had flown themselves. Or more accurately, they'd been flown by imagination, by the certainty of a beagle who knew, absolutely knew, that dogfighting was a game, and games were meant to be played with friends. And in the command bridge, Charlie Brown stood near a viewport, staring out at the stars streaming past as they accelerated toward hyperspace. He'd never seen space before. Never imagined he'd leave Earth, much less his backyard, much less end up here, millions of light years from home, watching alien constellations blur into lines of light. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. Vader, standing a few meters away, turned slightly. "It is efficiency. Order. The Empire spans this galaxy, bringing stability to trillions of beings. But is it happy?" Charlie Brown asked. "Your Empire, I mean. Are people happy?" "Happiness," Vader said, "is not the purpose of government. Order is. Security is. Happiness is what beings pursue when they are no longer afraid." Charlie Brown thought about that. "I don't think that's true. I think happiness is something you have even when you're afraid. Maybe especially when you're afraid." He touched the viewport glass. "I'm scared all the time. Of failing. Of letting people down. Of everything going wrong like it always does. But I'm still happy sometimes. When Snoopy does something funny. When my friends don't completely abandon me. When I get to fly a kite for 5 whole seconds before it gets stuck in a tree." Vader said nothing. But his breathing seemed louder in the silence. The Devastator entered hyperspace, reality stretching into the blue-white tunnel of faster-than-light travel. And deep in the ship's systems, in circuits and processors and power conduits, the contamination continued to spread. 12 hours to Coruscant. 12 hours for everything to go wrong. The Death Star hung in space above Coruscant like a mechanical moon, its surface covered with millions of lights that marked weapons emplacements, hangar bays, and habitation sectors. Within its vast interior, the Emperor's throne room waited in darkness, illuminated only by the cold glow of the capital planet turning slowly beyond the viewport. Emperor Palpatine stood before that viewport, his yellow eyes reflecting starlight, his withered hands clasped behind his back. He had sensed the disturbance days ago, a blank space in the Force, a wound in the fabric of reality that grew larger with each passing hour. And now Vader was bringing it directly to him. Good. The Emperor had not maintained power for decades by fearing the unknown. He had conquered it. Understood it. Bent it to his will. Whatever these anomalies were, they would become tools of the Empire or they would be destroyed. There was no third option. Behind him, the throne room doors opened. Vader entered, followed by a full squad of Imperial guards in their crimson robes and masks. And between them, looking impossibly small against the vast chamber's scale, walked a boy and a beagle. "My apprentice," Palpatine said without turning. "I sense you have brought me something interesting." They are more than interesting, Master, Vader replied. They are dangerous. The Devastator suffered 37% system degradation during transport. My crew reports continued malfunctions even after the prisoners were removed. Whatever they are, their influence persists. Fascinating. Palpatine turned, his yellow eyes fixing on Charlie Brown. Come closer, child. Let me see what manner of creature could cause such disruption. Charlie Brown hesitated. Everything about this place screamed danger, the darkness, the ominous figure in black robes, the guards who stood motionless as statues. Even Snoopy seemed slightly less confident, his tail wagging more slowly, his posture alert. Go on, Vader said, his voice leaving no room for refusal. Charlie Brown walked forward until he stood perhaps 3 meters from the Emperor. Up close, Palpatine looked ancient and terrible, his face a map of cruelty and cunning, his smile revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for humanity. What is your name? Palpatine asked, his voice deceptively gentle. Charlie Brown, sir. Your Majesty? Your Highness. Charlie Brown glanced back at Vader uncertainly. I'm sorry, I don't know the correct title. Emperor will suffice. Palpatine's smile widened. And this is your companion? Snoopy had trotted up beside Charlie Brown and now sat down, studying the Emperor with evident interest. His thought bubble read, impressive setup. Very dramatic. The Red Baron would approve. Palpatine reached out through the Force, attempting what Vader had already tried, to probe the boy's mind, to understand his nature, to find the source of the disruption he caused. The Force hit a wall. Not a wall of resistance. Not a Jedi's trained defenses. An actual wall, as fundamental and impenetrable as the boundary between matter and antimatter, existing not because someone had built it but because on the other side of that wall, the Force simply didn't exist. The Emperor's smile faltered for just a moment. You are not of this galaxy, he said. It wasn't a question. No, sir. We're from Earth. I don't know how far away that is. Really far, I think. We came here by accident. Through Snoopy's doghouse. We want to go home. His doghouse, Palpatine repeated, savoring the absurdity of the statement. A primitive wooden structure that somehow traversed dimensional boundaries and deposited you here. He began to circle Charlie Brown slowly, his robes whispering against the polished floor. Tell me, child, do you understand what you are? What your presence means? I'm just a kid, Charlie Brown said quietly. A kid who's really, really unlucky. You are more than that. You are a weapon. A living anomaly that destroys order simply by existing. Technology fails in your presence. Systems collapse. Causality itself bends around you. Palpatine stopped circling, standing directly before Charlie Brown. The Rebel Alliance would pay any price to possess such a weapon. Placed aboard an Imperial vessel, you could cripple our entire fleet without firing a single shot. Charlie Brown's eyes widened. No. I would never, I'm not a weapon. I just want to go home. What you want, Palpatine said, his voice hardening, is irrelevant. What you are is what matters. And you will serve the Empire, willingly or not. Vader shifted slightly, his cape moving with the motion. Master, perhaps it would be wiser to study them from a secure facility. Their continued presence on the Death Star could pose risks to. I am aware of the risks, Palpatine snapped. I am also aware of the opportunities. If we can understand how this boy's influence functions, we could weaponize it. Replicate it. Deploy it against our enemies while protecting our own forces. He turned back to Charlie Brown. You will be taken to a laboratory. Scientists will examine you. Test you. And you will cooperate fully, or your companion will suffer the consequences. Snoopy's ears perked up at the implied threat. His thought bubble read, I'd like to see them try. The Emperor noticed the beagle's reaction and smiled coldly. Ah yes, the animal. Lord Vader's report suggested it possesses unusual capabilities. Tell me, does it understand me? Snoopy understands everything, Charlie Brown said, and there was a note of defiance in his voice now. And he's not an it. He's my friend. And if you hurt him, I don't care what you do to me, You'll what? Palpatine leaned closer. Fail at me? Trip in my direction? 'Cause minor inconveniences? Charlie Brown said nothing. But his hands clenched into small fists. The Emperor laughed, a dry sound like wine through dead leaves. Such spirit. Misplaced, but admirable. You remind me of another boy, long ago, who thought friendship and loyalty could stand against power. His eyes flicked toward Vader. That boy learned otherwise. Vader's breathing intensified slightly, but he made no other response. Take them to detention level 5, Palpatine commanded the guards. Separate cells. I want them isolated from each other. Fear for one's companion often proves more effective than fear for oneself. No. Charlie Brown stepped forward. Please, don't separate us. Snoopy gets anxious when we're apart. He'll what? Palpatine's voice cracked like a whip. Destroy the Death Star with his anxiety? I think not. Guards, remove them. Now. The Imperial guards moved forward. 2 reached for Charlie Brown. 2 more moved toward Snoopy. And that's when things began to go catastrophically wrong. The floor beneath the guard shimmered. Not visibly, the polished surface looked the same. But underneath, in the structural supports, in the gravitational compensators that maintained the floor's integrity, something fundamental failed. One guard's foot went through the floor as if the durasteel had become tissue paper. He fell to his knee, his leg trapped, his ceremonial staff clattering away. The other guards paused, staring at the impossible sight of the Death Star's own floor betraying them. Continue, Palpatine ordered. They tried. But as they approached Snoopy, the beagle's imagination engaged fully. He was no longer in a throne room. In his mind, he was the World War I flying ace, surrounded by enemy forces, outnumbered but not outmatched. And in a galaxy where the Force touched everything, where reality was malleable to sufficiently powerful wills, imagination was closer to reality than anyone had realized. Snoopy's thought bubble read, time to show these Red Baron wannabes what I'm made of. He jumped. Not a normal dog jump. A physics-defying leap that carried him over the heads of the guards. Executing a barrel roll in mid-air that should have been impossible without wings or propulsion. He landed on one of the chamber's support columns, balanced there impossibly, and surveyed the room from his new vantage point with evident satisfaction. What? Palpatine began, and then stopped, because describing what he'd just witnessed would require accepting that a beagle had just performed aerial acrobatics without assistance. Secure that animal immediately. Vader commanded. More guards rushed forward. Snoopy leaped again, this time landing on a different column, then another, moving through the throne room like it was an obstacle course designed for his entertainment. Every guard who tried to intercept him found themselves in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time, slipping on floors that were suddenly frictionless, reaching for handholds that weren't there, moving in directions their momentum didn't support. It looked like combat. It looked like evasion. But really, it was play. Snoopy was having the time of his life. Enough of this farce, Palpatine snarled. He raised both hands, and force lightning erupted from his fingertips, blue-white arcs of pure dark side energy that could kill with a touch, that had broken Jedi Masters and reduced rebel heroes to screaming husks. The lightning reached toward Snoopy. And stopped. Not blocked. Not deflected. Simply stopped, as if it had encountered a boundary where lightning couldn't exist. The energy crackled in the air, reaching and reaching but never quite closing the final meter to its target. Palpatine's eyes widened. In 70 years of dark side mastery, nothing had ever resisted his lightning. Nothing. Impossible, he whispered. Snoopy cocked his head, studying the lightning with curiosity. His thought bubble read, interesting light show. The Red Baron tried something similar with tracer rounds. Didn't work then either. The lightning dissipated. Palpatine lowered his hands. And for the first time in decades, uncertainty flickered across his ancient face. Master, Vader said carefully, perhaps we should reconsider. Silence. Palpatine's voice carried pure venom. I will not be defied by a child and an animal. I will not be made to look foolish in my own throne room. If they cannot be contained conventionally. Warning klaxons began sounding throughout the Death Star. On the command bridge, Grand Moff Tarkin received reports that made his military precision falter, power fluctuations in sectors 7, 15, and 23. Turbolift failures on 30 different decks. Life support anomalies in detention areas. Hangar bay doors opening and closing without authorization. What is causing this? Tarkin demanded. Unknown, sir, his aide reported. Systems are failing across the station. Engineering reports no common cause, no pattern, just chaos, Tarkin finished grimly. He understood immediately. The Emperor had brought the anomalies aboard. And the Death Star, for all its power, for all its carefully engineered perfection, was not prepared for the collision of incompatible realities. In the throne room, Palpatine felt his control slipping. Not over the situation, over reality itself. The darkness he commanded, the power he wielded, the mastery he'd spent a lifetime achieving, all of it was encountering something it couldn't dominate. You will return to your cells, he said, his voice deadly calm. Or I will order this station to fire on the planet below. Millions will die, and their deaths will be your responsibility. Charlie Brown, who had been watching everything unfold with wide-eyed terror, finally found his voice. You wouldn't. You couldn't. That's evil. Yes, Palpatine said simply. It is. And I am capable of far worse. So you will cooperate, or you will learn what true suffering means. Snoopy jumped down from his perch and landed beside Charlie Brown. His tail wasn't wagging anymore. Charlie Brown knelt down and hugged his dog. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry I got us into this. In the distance, deeper in the Death Star's systems, something critical failed. A power relay that controlled the superlaser's cooling systems. Minor. Insignificant. Except the superlaser was the Death Star's primary weapon. And bad luck, once it started, rarely stopped at convenient places. The technical crew responsible for the Death Star's superlaser had served aboard the battle station for 3 years without incident. The weapon system was a marvel of Imperial engineering, precise, reliable, and powerful enough to destroy entire planets. Chief Engineer Bevel Lemelisk had personally overseen its construction, ensuring redundancies upon redundancies, failsafes upon failsafes. None of those redundancies had been designed to account for cartoon physics. Sir, Technician 10 Granite reported from his station, his voice uncertain. The superlaser's primary cooling system is showing irregular readings. Define irregular, his supervisor demanded. Temperature fluctuations that don't match any known failure pattern. The coolant is somehow both overheating and freezing simultaneously. That's not physically possible. Then your instruments are malfunctioning. Run diagnostics. Granite ran the diagnostics. His instruments were functioning perfectly. They were accurately reporting impossible data. Sir, I recommend we power down the super laser until we can identify the cause. Absolutely not. The Emperor himself is aboard. We maintain full combat readiness at all times. Adjust the coolant flow manually and compensate for. The cooling system's main pump simply stopped. Not due to power loss. Not due to mechanical failure. It just stopped, as if it had decided it was done working and nothing anyone did would convince it otherwise. Warning lights cascaded across control panels. Backup systems engaged automatically. And then those backup systems began reporting errors that made no sense, coolant flowing backwards, pressure readings that violated thermodynamics, temperature sensors displaying messages like error, temperature too confused TO display. Sir, we need to emergency shutdown. Now. Do it. They tried. The shutdown command was acknowledged. The system reported it was shutting down. The status displays showed all green. But when Granite checked the actual superlaser array, it was still active, still charging, operating independently of any control input. It's not responding, Granite said, his voice climbing toward panic. The superlaser is running on its own. We can't shut it down. In the throne room, Palpatine felt the disturbance through the Force, not from Charlie Brown or Snoopy, but from his own battle station, from the systems that were supposed to be infallible. He turned toward Vader, his expression thunderous. What is happening to my Death Star? The same thing that happened to the Devastator, Master. System degradation caused by proximity to. I know the cause. Palpatine's shout echoed through the chamber. I want solutions. Get them off this station immediately. Now. Before. The lights flickered. Every light in the throne room, in perfect synchronization, dimmed for exactly 3 seconds, then returned to full brightness. Then dimmed again. Then brightened. On. Off. On. Off. Like a cosmic light switch being played with by an invisible hand. Good grief, Charlie Brown said, watching the display. This is bad. This is really bad. Usually when things start doing that, it means something big is about to. The Death Star's primary power core experienced what the subsequent investigation would classify as spontaneous efficiency loss. Not a failure. Not damage. Just a sudden, inexplicable decision to operate at 73% capacity instead of 100%. Throughout the battle station, millions of systems received less power than expected. Most compensated automatically. Some didn't. Turbolifts stopped between floors. Gravity compensators in certain sectors weakened, causing personnel to float slightly above the floor. Communications arrays began transmitting on wrong frequencies. The cafeteria's food processors started producing meals that tasted subtly wrong, not spoiled, not poisoned, just off, in ways that defied description. And in the superlaser control room, Technician Granite watched his displays with growing horror as the weapon's charge reached maximum capacity. Sir, the superlaser is fully charged. If it discharges without proper targeting coordinates. It won't discharge, his supervisor insisted. The firing mechanism requires authorization codes. It can't fire without. The superlaser fired. Not at full power. Not with proper focusing. Not aimed at anything specific. Just a massive release of energy that had nowhere to go and no instructions on how to get there. The beam shot out into space at a random angle, missing Coruscant by a comfortable margin, missing all orbital stations, missing everything important. It struck an uninhabited moon on the far side of the system. The moon, which had no strategic value and no living inhabitants, ceased to exist. Throughout the Death Star, personnel felt the station shudder, the recoil from a weapon that had just fired without authorization. Alarms sounded. Officers shouted into comlinks. Grand Moff Tarkin stormed out of the command bridge, demanding explanations that no one could provide. In the throne room, Palpatine went very still. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded executions. My weapon just fired itself. Yes, Master, Vader confirmed. The Death Star, my Death Star, the culmination of decades of planning and construction. The ultimate expression of Imperial power, just fired itself at nothing for no reason. Yes, Master. Palpatine turned his yellow eyes on Charlie Brown. The boy was standing very still, hugging Snoopy, his round face pale with fear. "This is your doing. I didn't mean." Silence. The Emperor's rage exploded outward, a wave of dark side energy that made every guard in the room stagger. "You will be removed from this station immediately. You will be transported to a secure facility far from any Imperial assets. And if you ever, return to disrupt the Empire's operations, I will find a way to make you suffer that transcends your apparent immunity to the Force." "Master," Vader interjected carefully, "if we transport them via shuttle, the shuttle itself may experience failures. Perhaps a remote-controlled drone vessel. I don't care if you attach them to an escape pod and launch them into a sun." Palpatine snarled. "I want them off this station before they cause any more damage." Charlie Brown, finding a small reserve of courage in the face of absolute terror, spoke up, "If you just give us Snoopy's doghouse back, we could leave on our own. We could go home. You'd never have to see us again." Palpatine considered this. For a long moment, he stared at the boy, calculations running behind his ancient eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Vader, arrange for the structure to be transported here. If it proves capable of returning them to their origin point, allow them to leave. And if it doesn't?" Vader asked. "Then we launch them toward the outer rim and pray to whatever dark gods might listen that they land on a rebel planet." 3 hours later, in a hangar bay that had been hastily cleared of all essential personnel and equipment, Snoopy's doghouse sat on the deck plating like a monument to impossible physics. It looked exactly as it had when they'd arrived, red roof, weather vane on top, completely undamaged despite atmospheric entry, weapons fire. An Imperial scientific analysis. Charlie Brown approached it slowly, Snoopy walking beside him. Behind them, at a safe distance, Vader observed along with a skeleton crew of technicians monitoring everything from behind reinforced blast shields. "That's it?" Charlie Brown asked, looking at the familiar structure. "That's really it? You're letting us go?" "The Emperor has decided," Vader said, "that your departure serves the Empire's interests better than your containment. Do not mistake this for mercy. If you return, if you interfere with Imperial operations again, the consequences will be severe." Charlie Brown nodded. He wanted to say something defiant, something brave. Instead, he just said, "Thank you." He walked to the doghouse and pulled open the small door. Inside, it looked exactly as it always did, a small interior that shouldn't fit anything larger than a beagle but somehow always did. Snoopy hopped inside first, settling into his usual spot. Charlie Brown squeezed in after him, cramming himself into a space that physics insisted should be too small. "Good grief," he muttered. "I can't believe we're going home this way." Snoopy's thought bubble red, "Same way we came. Why should leaving be any different?" Charlie Brown looked out through the doghouse door at the massive hangar, at the Dark Lord watching from a distance, at the galaxy he'd accidentally terrorized. "I'm sorry," he called out. "For all the trouble. We really didn't mean it." Vader said nothing. But he raised one hand in what might have been acknowledgement. Charlie Brown pulled the doghouse door shut. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the weather vane on the roof began to spin. Slowly at first, then faster, then impossibly fast, a blur of motion that created a sound like wind rushing through canyons. The doghouse began to vibrate, then to glow with a soft red light that had no identifiable source. "My lord," one of the technicians reported. "We're detecting massive spatial distortions around the structure. Energy readings are off the scale. It's like it's tearing a hole in space-time." "Let it," Vader commanded. "Do not interfere." The doghouse lifted off the deck, rising smoothly into the air. It rotated once, twice, 3 times. The air around it shimmered with heat that wasn't heat, light that wasn't light, something that defied categorization. And then it simply wasn't there anymore. No flash of light. No explosion. No hyperspace tunnel. Just absence, as if the doghouse and its occupants had been erased from reality, or more accurately, had returned to a reality that didn't include Star Destroyers, Death Stars, or Sith Lords. The hangar was silent. Status report, Vader ordered. They're gone, my lord. All sensors confirm. No trace remains. It's as if they were never here. Vader turned and walked from the hangar. As he moved through the Death Star's corridors, he noticed systems beginning to stabilize. Power efficiency climbing back toward normal. Equipment functioning properly. The contamination was fading now that its source had departed. But not completely. Some things, once broken, stayed broken. Some systems would never quite work the same way again, their reliability permanently compromised by exposure to rules they weren't designed to handle. In his meditation chamber, Vader knelt and reached out through the Force, searching for any remaining trace of the anomalies. He found nothing. The blank space was gone. The wound in reality had closed. They're gone, Master, he reported to Palpatine via holographic communicator. Good. The Emperor's face was shadowed, unreadable. See that their existence is expunged from all records. No reports. No documentation. No evidence that they were ever here. The Empire does not acknowledge what it cannot control. Yes, Master. And Vader? If they ever return, if you sense that disturbance again, I will ensure they do not survive long enough to cause problems. See that you do. The hologram faded. Vader remained kneeling in his meditation chamber, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking about a boy who carried bad luck like a curse but still apologized for the trouble it caused. About a beagle who saw the galaxy as a playground and treated Sith Lords like interesting obstacles. About how something so innocent, so simple, had nearly brought the Empire's most powerful weapons to their knees. The Force whispered no answers. Perhaps because even the Force didn't know what to make of what had just happened. In the hangar bay, a single technician remained, staring at the empty space where the doghouse had been. He was holding a small device that had recorded the entire departure. Sir, another technician called from the blast shields. Are you coming? Did you see that? The first technician asked, his voice full of wonder. Did you see what it did? The Emperor ordered all records destroyed. I know. I know what the orders are. But, he looked down at the recording device. What if something like that comes back? Shouldn't we at least understand what happened? The second technician walked over and gently took the device from his companion's hands. Without a word, he placed it on the deck and crushed it under his boot. There's nothing to understand, he said firmly. It was a malfunction. An anomaly. Nothing more. And now it's gone. So let's keep it that way. They walked out together, leaving the hangar empty and quiet. Behind them, in the corner where the doghouse had sat, a single red-painted piece of wood lay on the deck, a fragment that had somehow broken off during the departure. It sat there, unremarkable and unnoticed. Just a piece of wood from a doghouse. But if someone had examined it closely, they would have noticed something strange. It was completely impervious to scanning, impossible to burn. And absolutely refused to be moved by any mechanical means. It stayed there for 3 days before someone finally just left it alone and declared that section of the hangar under maintenance. Some problems, it turned out, were easier to walk around than solve. Charlie Brown tumbled through a void that wasn't quite darkness and wasn't quite light, accompanied by the sound of Snoopy's doghouse creaking and the distant echo of a badly played piano. He had no sense of up or down, no way to measure time or distance. Just the overwhelming sensation of falling through something that reality had forgotten to finish building. Then, with a jolt that knocked the wind from his lungs, everything stopped. He opened his eyes to find himself lying on grass. Real grass. Earth grass. The familiar kind that stained your clothes and smelled like summer and home. Above him, the sky was blue, actually blue, not the artificial atmosphere of a star destroyer or the darkness of a space station. Actual Earth sky with actual Earth clouds drifting lazily past. Snoopy emerged from the doghouse beside him, shook himself with evident satisfaction, and immediately trotted off toward the house, their house, Charlie Brown's house, as if nothing unusual had happened. Snoopy. Wait. Charlie Brown scrambled to his feet and looked around. They were in his backyard. His actual backyard. The fence was there. The tree was there. The small water dish near the doghouse was still half full from whenever they'd left, hours ago. Days? Time didn't seem to have passed at all. From the house, his mother's voice called out, "Charlie Brown. Dinner's ready." He stood there, stunned. They'd been gone long enough for entire Imperial operations to be disrupted, for Star Destroyers to experience system failures, for the Death Star itself to fire its weapon accidentally. And here, apparently, only enough time had passed for his mother to finish making dinner. "We're really home," he said to himself, then louder. With growing realization, "We're really home." Snoopy was already at the back door, scratching to be let in. Charlie Brown ran after him, his heart pounding with relief and joy and the desperate need to confirm this was real, that the nightmare was over. His mother opened the door, looking down at him with mild exasperation. "Where have you been? I've been calling you for 5 minutes." We were, Charlie Brown stopped. How could he possibly explain? "Sorry, Mom. I was checking on Snoopy." "Well, come in and wash your hands." "And Charlie Brown?" She studied his face, which must have shown some of the stress he'd been under. "Are you feeling all right? You look like you've had quite a day." "You have no idea," he muttered. That night, Charlie Brown lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his room. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, the baseball glove on his dresser, the schoolbook stacked haphazardly, the small lamp that cast familiar shadows. Home. Safe. Normal. But he couldn't stop thinking about the galaxy he'd left behind. The stormtroopers whose equipment had failed because he'd walked past. The Star Destroyer that had lost power efficiency just from his presence. The Death Star, firing its planet-destroying weapon at nothing because bad luck didn't respect military protocols or engineering redundancies. And that Emperor. Those yellow eyes. That voice promising suffering. Charlie Brown pulled his blanket up to his chin, suddenly cold despite the warm night. They'd escaped. They'd gotten away. But that didn't mean the damage had stopped. His bad luck had a way of continuing long after he'd left a situation. How many people were still dealing with malfunctions? How many systems were still degraded? How much chaos had he left behind? Good grief, he whispered to the darkness. A sound at his window made him sit up. For one terrifying moment, he thought he saw the red glow of a lightsaber. But it was just Snoopy, visible through the window. Lying on top of his doghouse in his usual spot. The beagle's silhouette was outlined against the moon, and even from here, Charlie Brown could tell he was perfectly content. Of course he was. Snoopy had just had the adventure of a lifetime. He'd flown TIE fighters, evaded Darth Vader, resisted the Emperor's Force lightning. In his mind, he'd defeated the Red Baron and his entire squadron. He'd won. Charlie Brown envied that perspective. The ability to see everything as a game, as an adventure with no real consequences. But he couldn't do that. He never could. He always saw the consequences, always felt responsible, always carried the weight of everything that went wrong. He lay back down and closed his eyes, trying to sleep. In his dreams, he was back in the throne room, standing before the Emperor. But this time, when Palpatine raised his hands to unleash Force lightning, the energy didn't stop at Snoopy. It spread, crackling through the air, through the systems, through the very fabric of the Death Star. And Charlie Brown watched as the entire station came apart, not from violence but from simple, accumulated bad luck, every system failing simultaneously, millions of people evacuating or not evacuating, chaos on a scale he couldn't comprehend. And the Emperor's voice echoing through it all, "This is your doing." He woke with a gasp, his heart racing. It was still night. His room was still quiet. Everything was still normal. But the dream had felt like more than a dream. Like a premonition. Like a truth waiting to happen. The next morning, Charlie Brown sat at the breakfast table, pushing cereal around his bowl without eating. "You're very quiet this morning," his mother observed. "Just thinking," he said. "About the game today. Your team plays this afternoon, remember? The baseball game." "Right. Normal things. Normal problems. The kind where the worst that could happen was losing 50-0 instead of 40-0. "Yeah," Charlie Brown said. "The game. After breakfast." He went outside and found Snoopy still on his doghouse, but now awake and looking at him expectantly. "We can't tell anyone about this," Charlie Brown said, standing below the doghouse. "Nobody would believe us anyway. And even if they did, what would we say? Sorry about destroying that galaxy's technology, but it was an accident." Snoopy's thought bubble read, "They should have built better equipment. That's not the point. We caused real problems for real people. People might have been hurt because of us. And we just left. We ran away." Snoopy hopped down from his doghouse and sat in front of Charlie Brown, looking up at him with those dark, earnest eyes. His thought bubble read, "We didn't run away. We went home. There's a difference." "Is there?" Charlie Brown sat down on the grass. "I don't know, Snoopy. I just don't know. We've caused problems before, broken windows, lost games, failed tests. But this was different. This was huge. And we can never fix it." For a moment, they sat in silence. Then Snoopy did something unusual. He put his head on Charlie Brown's lap and stayed there, not playing, not imagining adventures, just being present with his friend who was hurting. Charlie Brown scratched behind Snoopy's ears. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I know you don't understand why I'm upset. But thanks for staying anyway." From down the street, voices called out, "Hey! Charlie Brown! You coming to the game or what?" It was his team. His terrible, perpetually losing baseball team, waiting for their manager who always led them to defeat. Normal problems. Normal failures. Charlie Brown stood up. "Come on, Snoopy. We've got a game to lose." That afternoon, at the baseball diamond, Charlie Brown stood on the pitcher's mound and threw the worst pitches of his career. Every ball went wild. Every strike somehow found a way to be a ball. The other team scored 17 runs in the first inning. "Good grief," Lucy said from her position at third base. Lucy said from her position at third base. "You're even worse than usual today, Charlie Brown. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with him?" He'd accidentally invaded another galaxy, caused system failures across Imperial military assets, forced the Emperor himself to retreat, and escaped by reality hopping through a doghouse. That's what was wrong with him. "Just having an off day," he called back. "You're always having an off day." The game continued. They lost, of course. 27-0, one of their more spectacular defeats, which was saying something. As the team dispersed, everyone complaining about their manager's terrible performance, Charlie Brown remained on the mound, looking at the ball in his glove. It was just a baseball. Simple. Ordinary. Understood. Not like the Force. Not like hyperspace. Not like technology that ran on rules so different from his own existence that they couldn't coexist. Charlie Brown. He turned. It was Linus, his best friend, approaching with his ever-present security blanket. "That was a rough game," Linus said diplomatically. They're all rough games. True. Linus sat down on the mound's edge. But you seem more bothered than usual. Did something happen? Charlie Brown almost told him. Almost explained everything, the crash, the Empire, Vader, the Emperor, the impossible journey home. But then he imagined trying to make someone believe it. Imagine the looks. The laughter. The inevitable, sure, Charlie Brown, and I went to the moon last week. No, he said finally. Nothing happened. Just the usual bad luck. Linus studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. You know, Charlie Brown, I've been thinking about bad luck lately. About how you always say you have it, and you're probably right. Statistically, the things that happen to you are improbable. But here's the thing. He adjusted his blanket. Bad luck means things go wrong. But it doesn't mean you're wrong. Does that make sense? Not really. What I mean is, the fact that bad things happen around you doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means, things are harder for you than for other people. And you keep trying anyway. Linus stood up. That takes courage. Charlie Brown didn't know what to say. So he just nodded. They walked home together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked nothing like the cold stars of space but were somehow more beautiful for their warmth and familiarity. Behind them, on his doghouse, Snoopy was already back in position, his imagination soaring through the clouds, chasing the Red Baron through skies that existed only in his mind, where victory was always possible and defeat was just another setup for tomorrow's adventure. And far away, impossibly, unreachably far away, in a galaxy still recovering from an invasion it couldn't fully understand, Emperor Palpatine sat in his throne room and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Doubt. Not about his power. Not about his plans. But about the fundamental nature of reality itself. Because if a boy and a beagle could simply ignore the Force, could operate on rules that contradicted everything he knew, then what else might be out there? What other impossible things lurked in the spaces between dimensions, waiting to collide with his carefully ordered empire? He pushed the thought away. Focused on his plans. On the rebellion. On maintaining control. But sometimes, late at night, when the Death Star was quiet and the galaxy turned beneath him, he wondered if that blank space in the Force might return someday. And if it did, whether the Empire would survive a second encounter. 3 months after Charlie Brown and Snoopy disappeared from the Star Wars galaxy, the Empire was still discovering the extent of the damage they'd left behind. Grand Moff Tarkin stood in the Death Star's command center, reviewing reports that grew more disturbing with each page. The superlaser's cooling system had been completely rebuilt, twice, and still operated at only 92% efficiency. 17 decks continued to experience intermittent gravity fluctuations. The turbolift network had developed what engineers called personality quirks, occasionally delivering passengers to floors they hadn't selected, as if the system had developed preferences about where people should go. It's spreading, Chief Engineer Bevel Lemelisk reported, his normally confident voice edged with frustration. Whatever contamination those entities introduced, it's propagating through our systems like a virus. Not consistently. Not predictably. Just, occasionally, things stop working the way they should. Can you fix it? Tarkin demanded. We've tried everything. Complete system replacements. Total code rewrites. Physical inspection of every circuit. Lemelisk spread his hands helplessly. The components test perfectly. The code is clean. But the malfunctions persist. It's as if the Death Star itself has learned to be unreliable. Tarkin turned to the viewport, looking out at the stars with the cold calculation that had made him one of the Empire's most effective leaders. Acceptable losses. If we avoid using the superlaser. If we limit operations to essential systems. Then yes, the station remains functional. But if we ever needed to fire the weapon in a critical situation, Lemelisk trailed off, the implication clear. The weapon that destroyed Alderaan, Tarkin said quietly, that terrified the entire Rebel Alliance into hiding, that represents the ultimate expression of Imperial might, is now unreliable. I wouldn't say unreliable, sir. More, unpredictable. In military terms, those are the same thing. Throughout the rest of the fleet, similar reports accumulated. The Devastator had been pulled from active duty for extensive repairs and still showed degraded performance. 3 other Star Destroyers that had been in proximity during the anomaly's transport had developed similar issues, minor, manageable, but persistent. The Rebellion, monitoring Imperial communications, noticed the increased maintenance requests and equipment failures. They theorized it was sabotage, perhaps a new Bothan operation. They never suspected the truth, that a boy and his dog had accidentally infected the Empire's war machine with cartoon physics. On Coruscant, in the Emperor's private chambers deep within the Imperial Palace, Palpatine meditated on the Force. But his meditations kept returning to the same question: what were they? Not aliens. Aliens could be understood, categorized, controlled. Not Force-sensitive anomalies. Those could be hunted, turned, or destroyed. Charlie Brown and Snoopy had been something else entirely, visitors from a reality governed by fundamentally different rules, rules that didn't acknowledge the Force's existence or authority. Master, Vader's voice came through the holographic communicator, pulling Palpatine from his thoughts. I've completed my investigation into similar phenomena throughout recorded history. And nothing. No records exist of dimensional incursions. No ancient texts describe beings immune to the Force. Whatever they were unprecedented. Vader paused. However, I did discover something concerning. Explain. The fragment of wood left behind in the Death Star hangar. The piece that broke off their structure during departure. It remains impossible to move, scan, or destroy. Engineering has simply sealed off that section of the hangar rather than continue attempting to interact with it. Palpatine's expression darkened. A piece of their reality, permanently embedded in ours. Yes, Master. And if one fragment can resist all our technology, all our power, what happens if they return with more? What happens if others like them arrive? It was the question Palpatine had been avoiding. The Empire was built on predictability, overwhelming force applied with ruthless efficiency. But how did you apply force to something that existed outside the framework that made force meaningful? We prepare, Palpatine said finally. Research into dimensional barriers. Protocols for detecting reality distortions. Contingency plans for evacuation if similar anomalies appear. We cannot destroy what we cannot understand, but we can ensure it never threatens the Empire again. And if the boy and his companion return, then we don't capture them. We don't study them. We don't bring them aboard our vessels. Palpatine's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. We destroy them from a distance, before they can infect our systems again. Launch every ship we have. Fire every weapon. Turn whatever planet they land on into slag. Better to lose a world than lose control of our entire fleet. Vader bowed his head. As you wish, Master. The hologram faded, leaving Palpatine alone with his thoughts. He reached out through the Force, searching the galaxy for any sign of the blank space, the wound in reality that had marked their presence. Nothing. They were truly gone. But the damage remained. And sometimes, when he was brutally honest with himself, Palpatine wondered if the Empire had actually won that encounter or if they'd simply survived it through the entity's mercy, or worse, their indifference. On a rebel cruiser hidden in the Atreus sector, Mon Mothma reviewed intelligence reports with General Dodonna and Admiral Akbar. The patterns were clear: Imperial equipment failures had spiked 3 months ago and remained elevated. Something had happened. Something significant. Could it be a manufacturing defect? Dodonna suggested. A bad batch of components distributed throughout the fleet. The failures are too varied, Akbar said, his Mon Calamari voice thoughtful. Different systems, different ships, different construction yards. If I didn't know better, I'd say someone had found a way to curse Imperial technology. Magic isn't real, Mon Mothma said firmly. But sabotage is. If we could identify the source, replicate it, we might have a weapon that could level the playing field against the Empire's numerical advantage. They would never find the source. Their best intelligence operatives would chase leads for years, eventually concluding it was some sort of anomalous cosmic radiation that had affected Imperial equipment during a specific period. Close to the truth, in a way. But not close enough to be useful. The rebellion would win its war eventually, but not because of Charlie Brown and Snoopy. The Empire's degraded systems would be a minor factor, a footnote in history. Just another example of Imperial equipment proving less reliable than propaganda claimed. No one would ever know the real story. Meanwhile, in a quiet neighborhood far from any galaxy far, far away, Charlie Brown stood on the pitcher's mound for another game. His team was losing. Again. Naturally. But something had changed over the past 3 months. Not externally. He still threw terrible pitches, his kite still got stuck in trees, Lucy still pulled the football away at the last second. Bad luck remained his constant companion. But internally, something had shifted. He'd seen an empire that spanned galaxies. He'd faced the most powerful beings in a universe of unimaginable scale. He'd been threatened by the Emperor himself and lived to tell the tale, well, to not tell the tale, since nobody would believe him. And if he could survive that, if he could come home from that, then losing a baseball game didn't seem quite so devastating. Strike 3, the umpire called as another batter connected with Charlie Brown's pitch and sent it sailing over the outfield. Good grief, Charlie Brown muttered, but there was less despair in it than usual. More resignation. More acceptance. After the game, another spectacular loss. 31-0, Lucy approached him with her usual critical expression. You know, Charlie Brown, you're a terrible pitcher. You've always been a terrible pitcher. You'll probably always be a terrible pitcher. I know, he said simply. Lucy blinked, caught off guard. Usually he argued or defended himself or at least looked miserable. Well, good. As long as you know. She walked away, leaving Charlie Brown alone on the mound. Snoopy trotted up, his thought bubble reading, that was fun. When's the next adventure? Hopefully never, Charlie Brown said. But he smiled slightly as he said it. Because the truth was, if it happened again, if Snoopy's doghouse decided to tear through dimensional barriers and dump them in some impossible situation, he'd survive it. He always did. That's what he did. He endured. They walked home together, boy and dog, as the sun set behind them. Behind them, the baseball diamond stood empty. Ahead, their house waited, warm and familiar and safe. In the doghouse in Charlie Brown's backyard, something subtle had changed. The wood grain ran in patterns that hadn't been there before, forming designs that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. The weather vane pointed in directions that didn't quite align with actual wind currents. Sometimes, late at night, the structure would glow faintly red, as if remembering its journey through spaces that weren't quite space. But Charlie Brown didn't notice. He'd learned a long time ago that paying too much attention to strange things only made life more complicated. And Snoopy, lying on top of his doghouse under the stars, imagined himself back in that other galaxy. Flying TIE fighters. Evading Darth Vader. Defeating the Red Baron's newest incarnation. In his mind, he was victorious. He was always victorious. Because that's how stories worked. The hero always won. The adventure always ended well. And tomorrow, there would be new adventures, new enemies to defeat, new skies to conquer. Even if those skies were just clouds above a suburban backyard. Even if the only enemies were imaginary. The important thing was the adventure itself. The journey. The story. And in that regard, Snoopy and his round-headed friend had just lived the greatest story of all, even if no one would ever know it had happened. In both galaxies, life continued. The Empire maintained its grip on power, slightly weakened but still dominant. The rebellion continued its fight, unaware of the brief chaos that had disrupted their enemies. And on Earth, in a small neighborhood, a boy and his dog lived their ordinary, extraordinary lives. Two realities, impossibly different, forever changed by their brief collision. And somewhere, in the spaces between dimensions, in the quantum foam where physics became suggestions rather than laws, a small piece of redwood that shouldn't exist continued to exist anyway, a bridge between worlds, reminder that reality was far stranger and more fragile than anyone wanted to admit. But bridges work both ways. And sometimes, doors that close don't lock behind you. Sometimes, they just wait. The galaxy far, far away would never be quite the same after Charlie Brown and Snoopy's accidental invasion. The Empire's technological supremacy had been revealed as fragile, vulnerable to forces that couldn't be predicted or controlled. The Death Star, that monument to Imperial might, carried permanent scars in the form of systems that occasionally forgot how to function properly. And deep in classified archives, encrypted beyond any normal security clearance, reports existed detailing an incident that officially never happened, an encounter with entities that defied everything the Empire understood about reality. Emperor Palpatine would spend years researching dimensional barriers, searching for ways to detect and prevent future incursions. He never found them. Some doors can't be locked from only one side. Darth Vader, in his quieter moments, thought about the boy who had looked at him without fear, not because of courage, but because the boy's universe simply didn't recognize what Vader represented. It was humbling in a way he'd never experienced. Even the Force, for all its power, had limits. Even the Sith, for all their mastery, couldn't control everything. And on Earth, Charlie Brown continued his life of persistent, gentle failure. He lost baseball games. His kites tangled in trees. His bad luck remained constant. But now, somewhere deep inside, he carried the knowledge that even the darkest villains in the most powerful empires could be defeated, not through strength or skill, but through the simple, unstoppable force of being fundamentally, impossibly wrong for the situation. Snoopy, of course, remembered it all as his greatest adventure. In his imagination, he defeated the Red Baron's Galactic squadron, explored the stars, and returned home victorious. The fact that victory mostly consisted of causing accidental chaos and escaping before anyone could stop them was, in his view, merely a detail. Two universes. Two sets of incompatible rules. One brief collision that neither would ever fully understand. The Force binds all things in its galaxy. But some things exist beyond its reach, governed by older, stranger laws, the laws of cartoon physics, of persistent bad luck, of imagination made semi-real. And sometimes, just sometimes, those laws are more powerful than any Death Star, any empire, any dark side. Because you can't destroy what you can't understand. And you can't understand what was never meant to make sense in the first place. Good grief, indeed.